Hi everyone, welcome to Miss Adams Teaches Macbeth Act 3, Scene 4. Okay, quick plot summary for you. Act 3, Scene 4 is the big banquet scene, which of course introduces Banquo's ghost. Before we meet Banquo's ghost, Macbeth has a little chinwag with the murderers. Might sound like a little bit of a dodgy thing to do, considering all of his guests are there in seat waiting for him to sit down, perhaps a sign of his overconfidence. Now, the problem with this conversation is that the murderers do tell Macbeth that Banquo's dead, but they also have to admit that Fleance survived, which is going to trigger a considerable amount of fear and concern in Macbeth. But before he can even think about that kind of fear, he has something very real in front of him, which is his hallucination of Banquo's ghost. It is important to recognise that he is the only one that can see him, not Lady Macbeth and certainly none of the noblemen. They believe that Banquo is alive and well, just not at the party. So Banquo's ghost is actually sat in the seat that Macbeth was going to sit in, which is obviously highly symbolic in itself. And Macbeth, visibly in front of his guests, demonstrates real kind of fear and kind of mad behaviour. He's shouting at the ghost directly, and Lady Macbeth has to do rather a lot of sort of managing of Macbeth and trying to get him to stop showing this kind of anguish that he is feeling, because the torment that he is feeling is plain for everyone to see. The other notable thing about this scene is the absence of Macduff. It is very much noted by Macbeth, the fact that Macbeth has not joined them, and it triggers him to decide to go and visit the three witches to find out more. So it's also quite a good scene in terms of creating a bit of narrative hook and narrative momentum, because we want to see what the witches have to say. Right, let's get started with a bit more detail. Okay, so this is a conversation with the murderers. Okay, so first of all, Macbeth is actually very pleased with them, and he flatters the murderers, but in quite an ironic way, by saying that they are the best of the cutthroats, i.e. there's no murderer better than you. Oh, thank you so much. That is so kind. But this obviously all changes the moment that the first murderer says Fleance is escaped. He's not being killed. Now, notice what Macbeth says here, and this little adverb. Then comes my fit again. Okay, so fit here is obviously about fear. He's not having a physical seizure. This is a mental torment. But the fact that we've got the adverb again says that this has been a recurring fear, and now it's almost come true. Now, what he actually wanted was the kind of sense that he would be safe and with a secure foundation. Okay, so if you have a little look at these similes here, we've got this lovely listing of similes. I had else been perfect, so if it wasn't for Fleance, he would have been perfect. Whole as the marble, founded as the rock, as broad and general as the casing air. So we've got a triad of similes that all suggest a sense of togetherness and stability. So that's how he wanted to feel. He wanted to feel stable. But instead, he is cabined, cribbed, confined. So notice that alliterative triad there. We've got this plosive alliteration. It's not actually a triad in total, because it's also got this fourth verb here. So it's more of an asyndetic list. I'm cabined, cribbed, confined, bound into saucy doubts and fears. Saucy feels really strange to be used now because of the connotations it has now, but it's more like irksome, tricksome, you know, problematic, doubts and fears. But we've got almost like a semantic field of entrapment here. He feels completely and utterly enclosed, claustrophobic, and what is trapping him is his sense of fear. Now, in this little interrogative, so just fancy word for question there, but Banquo's safe. Safe in this case just means I am safe from him. So it's a kind of euphemism for saying, is Banquo dead? And the murderer's like, yeah, absolutely. And then he uses this very kind of emotive, brutal description. Safe in a ditch he bides, with 20 trenched gashes on his head, the least a death to nature. Now, Macbeth is like, cool, thanks for that. I think it's worth noting that he doesn't actually draw attention, or he doesn't sort of focus on maybe the irony of this image, the 20 trenched gashes on his head. If it's all on his head, do you think that could perhaps look like a crown? Like the one thing that he's frightened of, you know, that actually this is part of the process of Banquo's sons becoming king. Possible. But to him, thanks for that. He's very dismissive about this brutal imagery. Okay, sorry. This little bit here. There the grown serpent lies. The worm that's fled hath nature that in time will venom breed, no teeth for the present. Now, we've seen this metaphor before. Okay, we've seen this metaphor in the earlier scene when he said, we have scorched the snake, not killed it. Okay, so he's saying when he said it back then, he was like, we haven't quite gone far enough, and now he's extended that metaphor, and it's Fleance that has become the snake. But here, notice he's sort of decided that it's not something that he needs to worry about right now. It's something in time will venom breed. So Fleance will become more and more dangerous as time goes on. Okay. So at this point, he goes back to the table to try and sit down amongst his guests, and he's very confused, and he actually gets quite aggressive with his friends, and he sort of says, who of you have done this? Because instead of his empty seat is the ghost of Banquo. Now, the next few slides, I've just got some key quotes to run through about his reactions to seeing the ghost. And then we'll have a little look at Lady M. So he says, this is direct to Banquo's ghost. He says, thou canst not say I did it. Never shake thy gory locks at me. So we've got this direct address when he's saying thy gory locks. Locks means hair. So it's hair covered in blood. When he says, thou canst not say I did it, that's a little ambiguous. Is he saying to him, you can't prove it, you can't prove it was me? Or he could almost be saying it to everybody else, more likely to him. We've got an imperative when he says, never shake thy gory locks at me. So he's trying to control the ghost, something that we see in him a lot. And obviously it's quite emotive, particularly that image of the gory locks, that adjective gory. Really kind of demonstrating how gruesome the image is. So in front of the guests, that's going to look mad. Okay, this is again, it's a combination of a bit of direct address to the ghost, but also a kind of address to everyone around him. Prithee, see there, behold, look, lo, how say you? Why, what care I? So it's all quite disjointed, and it's all quite ambiguous as to who's he talking to at where. But what we definitely have is we have minor sentences and interjections like this. We've obviously got simple sentences as well. They are largely exclamative. Look at all those exclamation marks, kind of suggesting that he's shouting. We've also got interrogatives. How say you? Why? What care I? Otherwise, you could call them rhetorical questions, of course, here as well, because he's not actually demanding an answer. This bit is a little bit of kind of forced confidence, like trying to suggest that he's not frightened of what he sees. But it's definitely clear that he's almost sort of demanding that everyone around him is looking like, look over there. Why can't you see him? So again, it's making him in front of the courtiers seem quite delusional, quite sort of impulsive. Well, out of his brain, let's be fair. It's going to look mad. Okay, Lady Macbeth has stepped in by this point, calmed him down. And so now we've got this lovely shift, okay, where he says, I drink to the general joy of the table and to our dear friend Banquo, whom we miss. Would he were here. The duplicity in this moment, which is why you'll notice we've got dramatic irony here written down, because of course nobody round the table, not even Lady Macbeth, knows that Banquo is dead, but Macbeth and us, the audience. So this moment, it makes Macbeth seem so callous and cold and cruel, because he's saying, oh, don't we miss Banquo? Let's raise a glass to his name. And this little exclamative here, I wish he were here. What a thing to say. when you've just murdered your best friend, because he doesn't actually mean it. He's not showing remorse. This is for the sake of the nobleman. Okay, next one. This is back to Banquo. Approach thou like the rugged Russian bear, the armed rhinoceros, or the Hyrcan tiger, Take any shape but that, and my firm nerves shall never tremble. So again, we've got that very kind of typical Macbeth, using lots of imperatives, trying to take control of the scene. We've got this triad that it creates this semantic field of animals, particularly of dangerous animals, the rugged Russian bear, the tiger, the rhinoceros, even the armed rhinoceros, making reference to the kind of the head of the rhinoceros and the danger that creates. Take any shape but that, and my firm nerves shall never tremble. So we've got this juxtaposition between the firm nerves, a little bit metaphorical there, and trembling with fear. The point he's making here is, as Banquo, he is more terrifying than any of those dangerous animals. He's saying, you take the shape of any frightening thing and I'll be cool. Take the shape of Banquo and I can't cope. Now, you can interpret that as you want. It could be guilt, it could be remorse, it could be those things, or it could be that kind of sense of dread in the prophecies and being caught. It's up to you to decide. Okay, this is to Lady Macbeth towards the end of the scene. You can behold such sights and keep the natural ruby of your cheeks when mine is blanched with fear. Okay, so we've got some lovely metaphor and colour symbolism here. He's basically making the point that his face is white with fear, whereas she is keeping the ruby of her cheeks. Again, there's this sort of sense of the distance between them. But obviously what he's not taking into account is that she can't see the ghost. It's just him alone in his fears. So again, you've got that separation between the two. Okay, the next little section we're going to look at, we're going to have a think about Lady Macbeth herself and the way that she manages to, well, manage Macbeth, like the tools that she uses to try and keep this together. Okay, so one thing that she has to do is address the courtiers and the noblemen about how Macbeth is behaving. So she makes excuses for Macbeth, but she's actually very clever in the way that she does it. She says, my lord is often thus and has been from his youth. Pray keep your seat. And if you much if you much note him, you shall offend him and extend his passion. So once she's normalizing his behavior, suggesting perhaps he's got some illness that, with being overwrought, he becomes like this. But she also says quite cleverly that actually, if they question him, it makes him worse. So it means that she silences them. And again, you've got the same thing here, where she says, I pray you speak not. He grows worse and worse. Questions enrage him. So not only don't comment on it, but don't ask questions, because that will make him worse. And obviously, their sort of first prerogative here is to look after the king and do what he says. So she has done a very good job in silencing them in this moment. Doesn't mean that they're not going to go and talk about him afterwards. She also addresses Macbeth. She also uses some tactics, some that we've seen before. So she says, you've displaced the mirth, broke the good meeting with most admired disorder. So that's quite straightforward. She's basically saying there, hey, we're all meant to be having a good time here. You've made it weird. That's generally what it means. You've made this weird. Now come back and get yourself together. So she uses quite a kind of easygoing, like, you're spoiling the party, let's get back to it. When that doesn't work, she's got to use normal is not fair. Tactics that we've seen before in Act 1, Scene 5, in Act 1, Scene 7, in Act 2, Scene 2. Are you a man? So that questioning his masculinity. Oh, these flaws and starts, impostors to a true fear would well become a woman's story at a winter's fire, authorised by her grandam. So she's literally like, this fear you're showing, this is reserved for women sitting around a fire telling creepy tales. So she insults his bravery. She talks about his fear not being manly. She insults his masculinity. Fairly standard Lady Macbeth tools in order to get Macbeth back in line. Okay, very quickly, I know this scene is a really big one, which is why there's a lot to go through, but I did just want to go through just the final section where Macbeth decides to go and see the witches. Now, the first thing he tells us is that he is going to find out where Macduff is. So he reveals here that he keeps a servant feed. So that means that he's got people in his house reporting back. So he knows exactly where Macduff is and his family and when, and that'll be very relevant for Act 14. Okay, we discover that he's going to go and see the witches. More shall they speak, so he wants to find out more, and we know he is his mind is made up on that front because he is bent to know. So he is like, it's almost like his body is moving forward towards them. He's so desperate to find out more. Okay, and then we get this metaphor that is used for Macbeth to justify why he's keeping on going. He says, I am in blood, stepped in so far that should I wade no more, returning were as tedious as going over. So imagine here, this is a horrible thing to imagine, when he says, I am in blood stepped so far, imagine like a lake of blood. Sorry about that. And he's basically saying he's walked halfway there. So if he stops now, getting back to any kind of sense of goodness is just as hard as carrying forward with his plans. So he's like, I may as well keep going. Not a great justification, that. It's just as tiring to go back as it is to go forward, because what he says is going forward is getting in further with these supernatural creatures. So, yeah, like I said, not particularly sensible action. Strange things I have in head that will to hand, which must be acted ere they may be scanned. So he's got these weird things in his head, and he's like, I need to act on these weird thoughts and feelings before I think too deeply about them. No, that's the worst advice ever. Actually, if you've got strange things in your head, you need to think it through before you go and do anything crazy. But he's thinking the other way around. He's saying being impulsive is the best thing. Lady Macbeth is like, man, do you need to get some sleep? So she recognises that his behaviour is irrational and out of his original character, you know, the character she spoke of in Act 1, Scene 5. So Lady Macbeth is concerned about him here. And again, you notice that separation between the two of them. Okay, final line, super ominous. My strange and self-abuse is the initiate fear that wants hard use. We are yet but young indeed. We are young indeed. He's basically saying we've only just begun in terms of the awful deeds. So we know that there is worse to come. Now, bearing in mind he's already killed the king and his best friend, it's like, how much further can it go? Okay, final thoughts from me. So this scene is a big one for key themes. So it's really worth having some quotes from this scene just for a variety of different essay topics. So consequences is a really big one because obviously it's the consequences of his decisions that are making his brain create the images that he's seeing. So for example, Banquo's ghost. Death, clear one. Madness, and this ties in really well with this, the public versus private, like what, as he gets more and more kind of stressed and irrational and anxious, he's losing that boundary between what is in private and what is in public, and he's creating some quite risky, suspicious behaviours. The supernatural, not just in the hallucination of Banquo, which you could argue is either his own mind through a kind of sense of guilt or it's a supernatural, but you've also got his decision to go back to the witches. And finally, the big one, fear. 100%, this is all about fear. So a great kind of essay would start with this extract and then look out at other examples of fear throughout the rest of the play. Sorry that was a bit of a long video, but Act 3 Scene 4 is so important. I hope it was helpful. Let me know if you've got any questions in the comments. If you haven't subscribed, please do so you keep on track of what videos I've got coming up. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching and happy revising.